Neither my current station nor my work history is a representation of my natural aptitude. I'm a substantially underutilised, untapped asset. Here's a few examples of what I mean. As a lowly yard hand, when I was posted remotely at a client's workplace, I made a number of traffic management solution recommendations, and this was taken up pretty much every time I made the suggestion, they took it up and implemented it. And they even invited me to take part in their safety committee meetings on a regular basis. They also received an award for their safety measures that they had put in place. The first example to the left is a pedestrian traffic management solution. Initially, the company had people walking around the back of the semi-trailers and trucks across access doors for forklifts, which is of course quite hazardous. What I recommended was that instead of walking around the back of the trailers, that we have a pedestrian pathway for the drivers to walk backwards and forwards across the front of the trucks to get to the offices that they need to get to. Now obviously in setting up the trailers, there has to be some activity near the trucks for the pedestrians, but there was also management solutions put in place for this. So the second recommendation to the top right is where we had trucks and forklifts clashing. It was quite hazardous for the forklifts to operate when you had trucks basically pulling out of a laneway and through where they were operating. Also had other forklift activity where forklifts had to come out and get pallets and stillages from where the trucks were. So what I recommended was that we set up some additional truck bays in that area. So we pulled the trucks away from the forklifts, and only the forklifts that needed to access those trucks moved into that area. So to the bottom right, we had a situation where inside the warehouse where I was posted, we had a heavy forklift traffic area where forklifts were coming in and out, and they decided to put a pedestrian crossing that went across that main thoroughfare for the forklifts, and they put up some safety gates. But the problem was they put the safety gates on backwards, which enabled pedestrians to rush onto the crossing and had difficulty getting out of the crossing. So what I recommended was that they reverse the gates so that people had to stop to open the gate, and it was easy for them to get out of the crossing. They could leave very quickly. I once worked for an art supply warehouse. It was one of the best companies I've ever worked for. We had monthly communication meetings, and in one of those meetings the owner actually asked us for ideas for new products. And here's a couple of the ideas that I presented. Top left is a design of a subframe for an art mannequin. This would have a latex outer skin and probably something like a silicon-based lubricant to create the right amount of rigidity and allow you to be able to manipulate the body parts. Top left is a modelling kit which would allow kids to model out of wax, and then they could make a mould, and there was a microwave safe container, but this would have to be used in supervision with an adult as well. But the idea was that you place the mould in the microwave, and then you would allow the wax to be removed, pool in the water, on the surface of the water that's in the container, and you would be left with your mould where you can make your own toys. For one of my ongoing postings as an on-call casual, I was assigned to a metal fabrication factory where I made a recommendation that they could use a mezzanine floor to deal with some of their space issues and get some of the minor tasks conducted up on that mezzanine floor. Of course, the nature of the 21st century and the nature of recruitment, All of the casuals had to be let go after a certain period of time, but I had heard that the mezzanine floor has been installed since. To the right, it's just a submission that I did for my diploma as part of an assignment. It basically removes some of the hazards to the workforce, creates a staging area, and also new locations for new product lines. My last full-time job required massive remodelling. It was in disarray, wasted invaluable storage real estate, introduced new product lines without there being sufficient room for existing stock, and the admin tools contributed to the chaos. For this business to function in the 21st century, it had to change. I submitted solutions for many changes. However, the owner was a hoarder who was reluctant to change. In addition, the environment was toxic. My manager was engineered out of the place. Then they came after me. There was definitely grounds for unfair dismissal. But why would I want to continue to work in such a toxic environment? Here are some of the solutions that I handed up. Some of them were implemented and some of them weren't. One of the products that the business stocked were boots of different styles and sizes. When selecting these boots, we had to dig through piles of boots that were sitting on pallets. It was time consuming and dangerous. We put together some cabinets for these boots. It made it safer and more accessible. All we had to do was just walk up to the cabinet, pick our size, walk away. That's simple. I submitted a draft. That was rejected. I submitted a second draft. That was rejected. I submitted a third draft. That was rejected. And then finally, the concept was accepted and the design was accepted. But someone came along and decided, okay, let's just put them on shelves instead of on pallets. And all this did was shifted the problem. It was still unsafe and we still had to dig through the boxes. In the centre is a recommendation for a major renovation. The business owner had a Land Rover and motorbike in the front of the warehouse. I recommended that it be mounted outside on top of a shipping container that the company owned. With this out of the way, we could use this area for outbound staging. I put forward the concept that we needed to use our vertical real estate more. As mentioned earlier, the warehouse was in disarray. I made recommendations to have dedicated aisles for dedicated products. As I mentioned a little earlier, the owner was a hoarder. Pretty much everyone in the warehouse was pushing for him to collect all his stuff and get it out of the warehouse so we could use it. Below left is one of the designs that I submitted for our dispatch area. Top right is simply an expression of how to lay out the boot aisle. Middle right is a recommendation of how we could lay out the rest of the aisles. The company actually used old fruit boxes as drawers on the lower level of the racking. I suggested we use this throughout the warehouse. It's very good, it's very safe, and it is easy to get to the stock. Pallets on the top two layers and our pick face in the centre bays. As a further extrapolation of that process, we have a pick face that is properly consolidated with assigned product locations, which could eventually lead to using RF scanners. Okay, so I've been talking about workplace solutions. I also try and find solutions for things that I do at home. I've put some sails over my pool, but I didn't want to use 100 by 100 mil posts. It's just ugly looking. I wanted something a bit more slight and a bit more low profile. But the problem with that is you don't have the strength, you don't have the structural strength, so I needed to find solutions where I could have the streamlined form but also have the strength to back it up. But in this case it's more about the play to counter for that strength. So you can see behind me I have two very rigid posts. I also have another one behind me over on this side over here, but we need to take up some of that tension away from that. So what I've done is I've got two other posts. So I've gone with the streamline option, And what I've done with one of my configurations is it's basically like a jib. So the harder the wind blows, the less force is actually on the post itself. In addition to that, I've brought the force down low on the post to reduce the leverage. If it's up higher, then the more force is on the top of the pole, and the pole will bend. So there's actually an articulating point towards the middle of that post. So this bracket where the mast and the jib meet isn't there to restrain or contain the movement in any way. It behaves more like a hinge. The movement is actually retarded by way of friction between the jib and the mast itself, not the bracket. The bracket is actually allows play. Now when the wind blows, there is a reduction in the friction between the mast and the jib, and this is where the strength comes from. So this is our second main post. We actually have two sails. We have two main posts, and we have three supplementary posts that basically just sit rigid. But this one uses pulleys and springs, so it takes up a lot of the tension, and it also relieves some of the snapping movement. It absorbs some of that energy. So I'll give you a look at that. Let's have a look. Okay, so again with this post I brought a lot of the energy down low on the post, so there's not so much force on it, less leverage on it. Okay, so as you can see, we've got springs here. These are all trampoline springs, and it's actually very low on the post. We move up higher on the posts. Okay, now looking up towards the top of the post, you can see that I've used pulleys and springs. Okay. So it's all about the transfer of energy so that the mast doesn't have to do much of the work. So a lot of the energy is taken up by the springs, and the pulley also allows it to be adjustable, and in the event of strong winds or storm, the pulleys and that movement that is allowed takes away a lot of that force. We have actually had a lot of strong winds and storms ripping through our backyard. On one occasion we had a massive hailstorm with very large hailstones, and here's an example of how the pulleys actually saved the day. It gave it so much significant movement that the weight of the hailstones drew the sail down without causing any damage. This is a photo of my veggie garden. It uses no fastening devices whatsoever. No screws, no bolts, no nails, nothing. It's held together with backfill and by the pavers that hold it back. So it doesn't collapse on itself because the backfill holds it up and the pavers stop it falling forward. I attached this photo to my resume when I applied for a job in a plant nursery. About a year after leaving that nursery, I received an email. In the email, it said that my application to participate in an exhibition was accepted, but I never applied. Someone else had used my photo for their application, but they forgot that my email address was on the bottom. I responded to the email explaining that there was a mix-up. I don't know or don't care what happened to the person who used my photo plagiaristically, but you would think in the world of horticulture they would know that you reap what you sow.